that's an area where you've done so much of the RCT work. You've really developed that part of the theory in significant ways. So again, for someone who's just coming to RCT, how would you initially describe mutual empathy?
Well, I think it's saying, first of all, there's the empathy part of it, which is saying one of the ways that we really get our common humanity is through empathic resonance and empathic responding, so that it feels like empathy is really an important source of information about our connectedness that is not voluntary. It is built into us. We are born to connect. We are hardwired to connect. And that is very much the way we feel our kinship with others. So I think the empathy there, a very important bridge, bridge to knowing, bridge to feeling with, bridge to healing. I mean, I think that's experience of isolation is one of the major sources of suffering as we think about it. So if you're in a situation where you feel isolated, one of the things that will help you most get out of the isolation is that sense of being understood, joining with, resonant with, getting your good vagal tone, your vagal nerve. So I think that the empathy piece is really important. But then I think, and a lot of people have written well about empathy and been interesting work on it. But I think the idea of mutual empathy is really saying, you know, we have to see, know, and feel that we have impacted the other person and that we matter to the other person. And that is necessary. Otherwise, empathy goes by the wayside. It's not noticed, it's not felt. So again, early on when we were doing mostly work with therapy, that became very important because there was a lot of emphasis in early therapy, psychodynamic therapy. There was a lot of emphasis on not showing yourself, not engaging, not being real as a therapist. So the idea of really beginning to show yourself, allow more of yourself to come into the relationship as a way of letting the other person know that they've had an impact on you and letting them see that is really a piece of what I think of when I think of mutual empathy. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's not reciprocal empathy. I think that's an important thing to say. It's not, you know, I'll empathize with you and you empathize with me. It's a coming together. It's really hard to describe in some ways, but it's a coming together in some kind of movement, joining together, and opening to being changed by one another. I think that is an enormous sense of trust in open to being changed by another person. I mean, you know, we spend a lot of time protecting our little egos and our little sense of I'm so special. But I think the idea of really opening to being impacted and changed and that is safer if there's a mutuality about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll talk maybe next time about boundaries and differentiation, but I think part of what you're talking about here is this idea that even when there's a power differential, so like with a therapist and a client or a teacher and a student, the person, because I would agree with you in teaching, I think for a long time, there was also sort of that distance, like the teacher would have a distance from in a hierarchical position over students and so on. And I think when we're talking about mutual empathy, it's not that we meet each other as peers now. We have different responsibilities, we have different roles, but that even the more senior person, the more experienced person, the person who's maybe more in the helping role, for them to sort of approach that relationship with the idea that I can be affected by you, I can learn from you,
yes,
be changed by you, that your emotion might touch me, and I will feel something in that. Now I can't fall apart because then I'm not staying involved, right? But to be able to be moved by you does, I think, reduce the hierarchy. And and again, I hadn't thought about it before, but I do feel like empathy sounds like something that we grant to another person almost, right? We give another person, and once you attach mutual to it, to me, it's like it can only happen between two people who are open to each other in ways that are appropriate given their roles.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, we're not there to grow from the empathy of our clients, or I mean, that's not the point. But I think the point that it's a sign of respect, that we do take in and are changed by the other person, is really very important as well.
Yeah, for me, it seems almost like if I try to work from a place of mutual empathy, I feel like I'm honoring your humanity and my own in a way that I'm not if I somehow keep myself distant and removed,
Yeah.
and, you know, more in a hierarchical position. That
Yeah.
that I come to you as a human being and you come to me as a human being, and
yeah.
let's acknowledge that, again, staying within our roles and our responsibilities, but how can we bring humanity to that work?
Yes, that's really important.
That we've signed on to do.
Yeah. And I think actually the mutuality piece is a useful corrective to power over. I mean, if you're really engaged in mutual empathy and mutuality, you really are going to be moving away from a power over model. So, I mean, that's it. You're opening to impact from other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. You, as I said, I was reading some of your work before our conversation today, and one of the lines I copied was, you said, mutual empathy is the core process that allows for growth in relationship.
That's what I believe.
Yeah, I mean, so it's all that sort of movement that we're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I also wanted to ask you about anticipatory empathy. This is another, when I was looking at empathy, there was this cluster here because there are a couple different ways that you talk about empathy. So what is anticipatory empathy?
That I actually, the way I think about it is it's sort of as you're getting to know somebody or working with somebody as a teacher or whatever, you start to be able to predict a little bit what impact certain things from you are going to have on the person. Now, you're not always right. Sometimes you're really off base, but often you're right, and you're kind of making an effort to be right and to be accurate. So I think of anticipatory empathy as sort of, it's a little bit like prefrontal cortex coming into the picture, but it's like, I'm not going to address this because this is all in my head. I'm not going to address this right now because actually I think that the impact would be negative. And this is partly, where the role issues come in, is I'm there to try to assist. You're there as a teacher trying to teach and help someone learn. I'm there trying to assist people in different ways. And if I can use anticipatory empathy to inform my actions and my possible impact on the other person, I'm more apt to be accurate. Mm-hmm. And that feels like an important skill. And it's a little bit also, the whole area of authenticity has gotten way off track in my mind. It's gotten so into, I think Maureen called it amygdala authenticity at one point, which is just blurting out whatever comes into your mind, and no anticipatory empathy, no awareness of how that's going to land with the other person. And that is so, it's power over for one thing, but it's also so, it's kind of insulting. And so I think that's, when I think of anticipatory empathy, I think it's an attitude almost. Mm-hmm. And it's built on, certain things about the person. So it's not like it's just random guessing. It's built on an understanding that you've developed about that person, and a kind of a guesstimate in a way of, would this be helpful? And of course, that gets back to the whole question of roles. Mm-hmm. We're there to help. You're there to teach. And we're not there to just grow. Mm-hmm. We'll grow if it's a good relationship, but that's not what we're there for.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And authenticity is definitely something we'll come back to next time. But I did want to say, I also think the example you gave is like, you might decide this is not going to be helpful to this person for me to bring this up right now. And what I'm also thinking is that in education, sometimes I have to bring that thing up, right? Because the student has to progress in their program or has to make some changes in order to progress or something like that. And so I'm imagining that part of it might be trying to bring that anticipatory empathy to, how can I best bring this, in my estimation, how can I best bring this to this person?
Exactly.
Even though I know you know, for one person, it may be most useful for me to be very direct and to the point. And for someone else, it might be useful for me to couch it in some different terms. So,
yeah.
So it's not an all or nothing thing, but it's sort of a more thoughtful strategy piece, right?
Excellent observation. Yes.
One other aspect of empathy that you wrote about was self-empathy. And you wrote, in the process of self-empathy, one also develops an empathy for that which is human in oneself, often for very real and inevitable human failures or losses.
I always struggled with the self-empathy because, of course, it brings the word self into the picture again, which I struggle with. But what I was trying, I mean, I really believe there is something akin to self-empathy, which is, can people, and I found this a lot in working with trauma, can people bring to their own experience, is the way I think about it. I substitute the word experience for self sometimes, but can I bring to my own experience that attitude of acceptance, validation, kindness, thoughtfulness. There's a whole world now of self-compassion, which has developed more recently. But I think it's a very similar kind of idea, which is, you know, if you can bring kindness to yourself, if you can bring understanding to yourself. In working with trauma, I've often spoken about the fact that in groups, this is with sexual abuse survivors in groups, very often people who are very rejecting and very negative and very harsh about their own experience, they will see the other person talking about or hear the other person talking about a certain experience which is similar, and they will in fact be quite kind, quite generous, quite attentive, quite empathic. And if they can then bring that, and sometimes in groups people will point out, they'll say, well, gee, Susan, you were so tough on yourself about this, and look at the understanding you're providing to Diane. So I think and I think that does happen. And I haven't done a lot to develop that whole notion of self-empathy. And I think self-compassion works pretty well for a lot of the same ideas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was also thinking that maybe self-empathy might also include the ability to honor and celebrate oneself. So not only to be tender with oneself in difficulty, but also to notice when we should, again, pause and celebrate or honor what we're doing or what we bring.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I think it's true.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for interview number 2.
Yeah, thank you.